I'm going to be painting a semi-abstract watercolour using a plastic store card. Let's get started. So I'm going to start off with the sky first. I'm just using 3 primary colours, ultramarine with some red. You can use cadmium red, a big puddle there, and I'm also adding a little bit of ultramarine to the red there and mixing some red and yellow. You can use cadmium yellow, so a nice big puddle of that. Make sure you mix up plenty of paint. I'm wetting the paper, 300 grams paper here, with a large flat 1-inch brush, and I'm painting the orange first, sort of about a third from the bottom, and just painting this wet in wet. I've actually added a touch more yellow, wanted a touch more yellow there right on the horizon. And I've added a little bit of red to that to make a red orange, and I'm painting this wet into wet there in the middle of the paper, and I've swapped to my round brush there just to blend that orange to the top part of the sky. And now I'm using the red with a pinch of ultramarine and painting that at the top there and tilting, really loading my 1-inch brush there and painting the ultramarine with the red there at the top, really loading the brush and tilting that painting, as you can see there, and allowing it to kind of flow into that red orange there, tilting, as you can see, getting it to blend. I'm teasing the paint there with my brush, sort of tilting it sideways to let the paint blend on the paper. And I'm collecting any puddles there with a clean damp brush as I tilt towards the side, and I'm tilting again to allow the paint to flow. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry. So the painting is dried. I'm just using clean water to sort of paint in buildings. These are the shapes of the buildings that I can see in the photograph. So I'm going to paint wet into wet. And then I'm painting just with water here down to the bottom of the painting. I'm using my flat 1-inch brush here, mixing up the ultramarine and the red. And I'm painting wet into wet at the bottom where you've got that lovely silhouette. My son actually took this photograph, and he's actually in Sydney at the moment, and this was a view from his bedroom window, and I just loved it with the sunset, with those silhouetted buildings, with the lights in the buildings in the background there. Looks so atmospheric. So just adding a little bit more red here with a pinch of ultramarine, using my round brush, tilting. As you can see, there's a big puddle at the bottom of the painting there, tilting sideways and just varying the colours. I've actually added some yellow to the ultramarine there to get a lovely dark green. As you can see, really tilting right up into that lovely orangey sky there. Don't be afraid to tilt. Using my flat brush now just to sort of make some buildings, some imaginary buildings going over some of that wet paint that I painted previously. And I'm using the sort of tip of the brush there and just sort of chiseling in some marks on the buildings, painting damp into damp with a mixture of the ultramarine and the red. Quite a creamy mixture, so this doesn't run too much. Some areas are dry as well where I haven't wet the paper originally. So I'm just sort of adding more buildings using the whole of my brush, the tip of my brush, the edge of my brush to paint these buildings. And you can vary your darks as well. Maybe add a little bit more blue, less red, maybe some more red and less blue. And it just makes your darks more interesting. So I'm using a plastic card now cut up, and I'm printing with some of this dark paint here, the ultramarine with the red. It's slightly creamier, and I'm just printing marks on the building. So this is quite sort of abstract in a way, but it gives the impression of the buildings. So I've squeezed out some pea-size watercolour blobs here of ultramarine, a little bit of neutral tint and a touch of Venetian red. You could use light red or burnt sienna even. So it's straight from the tube, and I'm printing with the plastic card these dark sort of colours, and you can sort of mix the colours. You can sort of press it into those 3 blobs and then sort of blend by tapping on your palette. So I'm actually working pretty much now damp into damp, so the surface has still got a sheen and the sort of paint is very thick. Remember, it's straight from the tube. And I'm just sort of literally abstractly working here, printing these marks, kind of creating the impression of buildings, but also just going off, creating just shapes and marks and seeing what happens. So as you notice, when the paint is straight from the tube, it's a lot darker. because paint gets lighter when you add water to it. And you get soft edges still because I'm working on a damp surface. I've swapped to a smaller plastic card here cut up, and I'm just sort of painting pretty much, or printing rather, wet on dry here using the darks, creating different marks, especially at the top of the buildings here and there. Sort of printing as I go to create the look of lots of different windows and sort of different details on the buildings, and also cranes as well. We get a lot of cranes in London. There always seems to be new buildings going up. So I'm just sort of lifting off a little bit here with my plastic card, sort of swiping, because the sheen is nearly gone, but the paint's still damp. So it allows you to lift off a little bit. So it creates more light effects, which is quite effective. So I'm just lifting off here and there, just going with my instincts, see what I like. It can be so creative and therapeutic, this technique. Working pretty much on your imagination. Yes, I've got this reference, photographic reference here, but I'm really just painting from my imagination, and every now and again I might refer to the photograph just as a guide to the shape of the buildings, etc. So again, just applying a little bit more paint here, using my plastic card with that lovely luscious tubed paint there. Now, if you don't have tubes, don't worry. What I would suggest is spritzing your pans beforehand. Let that water soak into the colours that you're going to use, and then apply the plastic card. But just to say, it does work best with freshly squeezed paint. So I'm going back to that 1-inch brush. I'm just getting some of that dart there using the neutral tint and painting damp into damp. The sort of foreground, it could be water or it could just be lots of dark buildings, and I'm just blending damp into damp there using all of the dark colours mixed up together. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry once more. What I'm doing now is I'm actually using paint again straight from the tube. I've actually squeezed them out into my pans. I'm using a wooden peg here. You get them on the back of box canvas paintings, but you could actually continue using the plastic card, the bottom of your paintbrush, at the bottom of a tube of paint. You can get quite creative with this. And I'm just applying the yellow, and what that does, it creates light from the buildings. You can see there's lots of lights coming from those buildings that are silhouetted against that lovely sunset sky. So I thought the yellow would be quite a nice colour to start with. And I'm sort of printing, creating different marks using the side of this wooden peg, but also the sort of corner of it as well. I've swapped to some yellow ochre as well. You could use Naples yellow to create a different sort of yellow light. And now I've dipped my little wooden peg into some red paint. Still got a little bit of yellow on there, so I've got sort of orange lights now, which is quite nice. So I'm just applying red. And that really does look quite effective, doesn't it? It really stands out, sort of really gives the painting interest and colour. And I'm just sort of pulling that down as well a little bit. So you haven't got a blob, it almost looks sort of shimmering in the distance. So, and then reapplying some of that red on top. So adding a little bit more yellow with the yellow ochre, and I've decided to sort of print some light in that dark area, and I thought it'd be quite nice because it could be water and this could be light reflected in the water. So I'm sort of scraping the paint down as well, so it looks like a lovely soft reflection in the water. And I've decided to use a clean damp brush just to blend that a little bit, to push it back so it doesn't stand out too much, just to give that impression of the light on the water here and there. I've decided to use the wooden peg now just to apply some white paint, white gouache. You can use white acrylic or white watercolour, and sort of print it to make lots of little windows there of light. It looks so effective. And what I would say is don't fill a whole building with lots of little windows, just paint them here and there. And I'm going to finish off with a spatter of white gouache, slightly watered down with my size 4 brush to give my painting a little bit of sparkle. I've removed the washi tape and here's a close-up. I'm really pleased with the light and the textures and the atmosphere of that gorgeous sunset sky. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. And if you'd like to support the tutorials that I create here on YouTube, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You'll get access to weekly exclusive content, ad-free content, and line drawings, and you can cancel anytime. Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy abstract painting. Bye for now.